Across the country, there are about 63 million parents with children under the age of 18, according to 2020 U.S. Census data. Especially during the pandemic, parenting was no easy feat. Learning was disrupted, finding childcare was impossible, and being a parent in general felt especially isolating. Even those working within the childcare industry felt burnt out and undervalued. Now, more than 2 years later, as the pandemic winds down, many of these problems still remain. Parents are left largely on their own to arrange care for kids who aren't yet in school, but with severe staffing shortages and high demand, prices continue to rise. Many are asking, why isn't more being done to support people working in this industry and the parents who need more help? Dr. Caitlin Moran is one expert studying these challenges facing the sector. Moran is an assistant professor of early childhood education at St. Joseph's University. She notes that there are several options when it comes to child care for kids.
So parental care, there's relative care. It could be a sibling, it could be a grandparent, it could be an aunt. There's non-relative care. That could be a nanny, that could look like an au pair, that could look like a babysitter. And then you have your more organized arrangements, and that's kind of more typically where you get into the early childhood education piece, because usually there's more organization, there's a schedule. This is typically outside the home.
This means more curriculum-based child care that is developmentally appropriate for each kid. These types of care either operate out of a provider's home or an official center and require state licensing and approval, but are typically more expensive.
For example, in full-time center-based care for 2 children is the highest single household expense in the Northeast and the Midwest. So cost is a big issue. And then you have programs like Head Start, which provide quality care to income-eligible families, but there's not enough seats. There aren't enough Head Starts to serve the need. So currently Head Starts serve about 42% of all eligible children. So cost is a big factor.
And even if parents can scrounge up enough to make ends meet, often there are no open spots due to staffing issues.
That has become an issue after COVID because we have seen this exodus of the workforce. It's a workforce that's been underpaid for a very long time. And during the pandemic, the workforce, I don't think, could reconcile being so undervalued financially, but also being considered essential workers. So many weren't paid when their programs were opening and closing, and that was not sustainable for their families. So they left. And that becomes an issue because when you have a licensed facility, so that could be the home care or center-based care, you're required by law to abide by ratios. So for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, you have to have 1 adult for every 10 children. And so when we've seen this mass exodus, I mean, in Pennsylvania, where I'm working and conducting my research, 91% of childcare programs are experiencing staffing shortages. There are 7,000 positions currently open because parents have gone back to work or caregivers have gone back to work, and there just aren't enough seats. So availability has become a really big issue.
In May 2021, the hourly mean wage for a worker at a child daycare service was $12.40, according to data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. Moran adds that most of these child care employees are paid hourly and receive little benefits. With inflation and many other positions open that pay better, what incentive do people have to stay? On top of this, many working are mothers themselves who are struggling to arrange affordable care for their own children.
They have even made comments like they can't afford to send their child to the setting that they're working in, even with the discounted rate or a subsidy. So they have to make really tough choices to be able to work daily. And it's typical to go to a family member to help cover care, or instances where they may bring their child and their child will come with them, but only for 2 or 3 days because that's what they can afford. And then they need to kind of put together a sort of fragmented childcare plan because they are so underpaid.
Even outside of center-based care, many private nannies face the same predicament. There are hundreds of thousands of nannies across the U.S., with a large majority being women of color who span all ages. Sometimes these private nannies have their own young children and must leave them in order to raise someone else's kids.
The experience of leaving a child behind indefinitely sometimes in order to protect and care for that child. And on the other side, to come into a home with another child who is needy and is small and is equally precious, and to form a relationship with that child because your work involves direct care that inevitably creates this bond. And that conflict is apparent in a number of the stories I heard.
That's Dr. Elizabeth Cummins Munoz, a lecturer in writing and communication at Rice University and the author of the new release, Mother Coin, the story of our immigrant nannies. In her book, she features the stories of several women from Mexico and Central America who now reside in Houston and work as private nannies for local families.
The work that they were doing in Houston, primarily with the ones that I was speaking with, because they were there day after day with the same children, most of these women were employed by one family. Their work usually combined cleaning and housekeeping with childcare. Some of them only came a few days, and on the other days, they might have a house to clean, or they might have another child that they took care of. They ranged in age from late teens, almost early 20s, to women in their 70s, grandmothers.
She says many of these nannies are not salaried.
But the women that I worked with tended to be paid weekly. There was a variation between employers who paid sort of regardless of illness on either end, regardless of if the employers were taking a vacation or not. Some did and some didn't. And one of the salient realities of this industry and this work is that it is effectively wholly unregulated.
This means that many private nannies have no paid vacation leave, sick leave, or any kind of fallback if they can't make it to work that day. All of the power rests with the employers, who can choose to add on these benefits if they see fit. If these nannies don't get any paid time off, they may not see their families for months or years on end. Munoz says that many of them relocated to Houston to work and left their own children back in Mexico or South America. The kids of these nannies were then placed in the care of other family members who were often already overloaded with kids, work, or unable to properly care for them. While this decision allows these nannies to send more money back home, it permanently affects the family unit, even if the children eventually relocate to the U.S. to live with their working mother.
I'm thinking of a woman I call Sarah, who really, really struggles with what she perceives as her 7-year-old son's kind of growing resentment against her mother for spending so much time at work taking care of other children, and really calling her out for it.
While nannies like Sarah are working, their kids are often left in childcare that fails to meet their developmental needs. And this is the reality. Moran says the sad state of childcare in the U.S. has lasting implications on kids.
Estimates suggest that only 10% of childcare meets the quality requirements shown to lead to positive outcomes for children. And then when you get into underserved communities, much of the quality available for families is low. And process quality in particular is very low. So we do know, though, that quality makes a really big difference. Quality programming leads to better performance on cognitive tests, more developed social, emotional, and language skills, improved school outcomes, such as reductions in grade retention, special education placement, increases in high school graduation rates. And again, we know children from low-income backgrounds, for this group of kids, those benefits are not only consistent, but they're magnified when they have access to high-quality care.
Moran believes that fixing the system starts by focusing on the workers. This means the private nannies, the employees at childcare centers, and providing more adequate government assistance to family members who step into the role of caretaker.
The early childhood educators need to be paid a livable wage, because without them, there is no accessibility, there's no availability, there is no programming, there are no seats available, and families will continue to struggle to find childcare. It has been on the past two administrations' radar to make these investments. It hasn't happened in the way that it needs to, but I think it's important that our legislators and politicians and those who represent us understand that investing in childcare, whether it's the workforce investment, and that is on the table, but as increasing subsidies and helping families with tax credits and other ways that we can support families financially to be able to access early childhood education.
To find out more about this topic and our guests, Dr. Caitlin Moran and Dr. Elizabeth Cummins Munoz, head to viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
I think most people would struggle to tell you what their military budget is, how many people are in their military.
The divide between service members and the public. Then,
the U.S. spends a minuscule amount on early childcare and education, $500 per year per toddlers.
Navigating the realm of parenting with little support. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.